The brain. What a marvel. Perhaps the most intricate construct in the known universe. Within the confines of our skulls, we carry a cosmic web of connections, more numerous than the stars in the Milky Way. Your brain alone, packed with the equivalent of 10,000 galaxies worth of neuronal pathways. It's this vast and intricate network that conjures the essence of who we are. How does this biological enigma, the brain, generate the phenomenon we call the mind? The challenge of decoding how the mind emerges from this neural tapestry is monumental. It seems, on the surface, that reality simply flows into our consciousness through the transparent portals of our senses, the eyes, ears, and the rest. What we perceive, what we assume to be the objective reality, is not what it seems. The truth is far more elusive. From the very instant sensory data hits our brains, it's morphed, transformed. The world we think we know is a carefully constructed illusion, crafted by a brain that doesn't let on how much it filters and alters. Take illusions, for example. These fascinating phenomena are like cracks in the matrix, revealing the dissonance between perception and reality. They're clues, hints that the way we perceive the world isn't the way it truly is. And this brings us to a profound question. What if the greatest illusion of all is you? The very sense of self that you cling to might be as much a fabrication as everything else you perceive. Have you ever stopped to question what's real? What does real even mean? Somehow, the entire external world, with all its complexities and wonders, finds its way inside our minds. How can we be sure that what we see, hear, or feel is the genuine article? Think about it. Your brain is locked inside the dark, silent vault of your skull, cut off from direct contact with the world. It's a collection of billions of cells floating in a murky pool, isolated from all sensation. And yet, it's from this isolation that the vibrant tapestry of our perceptions, memories, and experiences of the world arises. Consider this. Whether we're talking about a tiny ragworm or a colossal sperm whale, all brains are composed of microscopic cells called neurons. Their task? To translate external stimuli, be it light, heat, sound, or pressure, into electrochemical signals that the organism can interpret and act upon. As neurons process these sensory inputs, they don't simply pass them along untouched. Instead, they craft a curated, edited version of reality. Astonishingly, our brains discard about 99% of the incoming data, reshaping the remaining fragment into something we can comprehend and use. Neurons, in their relentless competition, are the architects of this altered reality. When an organism touches, smells, sees, or hears something, its sensory neurons spring into action, some responding more vigorously than others, depending on the intensity of the stimulus. But as these signals cascade towards the brain, the weaker ones are systematically suppressed, leaving behind a refined, edited version of reality. Illusions are far more than mere tricks of the eye. They're essential tools, revealing the profound gap between objective reality and our subjective experience. These perceptual quirks offer us a rare glimpse into the constant behind-the-scenes work our brain does to construct our reality. Take the classic example of Adelson's checkerboard illusion. At first glance, certain squares appear distinctly darker or lighter, but in a surprising twist, they're actually the same shade of gray. The illusion stems from your brain's instinctual adjustment for the shadow, automatically factoring in the light source and subtracting it from your perception. Essentially, your brain is running a quick calculation, a shortcut to form what it believes to be a coherent perception. But if such shortcuts can warp reality this significantly, we must ask ourselves, just how much of the world are we truly seeing? The startling truth is that our visual grasp of the world is minuscule. At any given moment, we're effectively blind to 99.9% of what's around us. Consider this. Extend your arm, thumb up, and focus on your thumbnail. That tiny area, about 1 degree of your visual field, is the only spot where you experience true 20/20 vision. Everywhere else, you're legally blind. It sounds counterintuitive, yet this is how human vision operates. We perceive detailed imagery in a mere 1% of our visual field, because only a small portion of the world can be processed with high fidelity by the retina. The rest? It's an elaborate construction by the brain, built on assumptions, models of reality, and a scant amount of detailed sensory input. Our eyes dart about 3 times per second, something we scarcely notice, but without which we'd be practically blind. These rapid movements are crucial. Without them, to see the world with clarity, we'd need retinas capable of capturing every detail, which would require a brain 600 times larger. And this is just for vision, our most sophisticated sense. The other senses, even more impoverished. So, what does this mean for our experience of reality? It's easy to imagine that we simply open our eyes and the world floods in, fully formed. But the truth is more complex. Our eyes sample minuscule fragments of our surroundings, and our brain continuously fills in the gaps. We feel as if we perceive a rich, full, detailed world at every moment, but this perception is largely illusory. What we're actually aware of is a tiny fraction of the sensory data entering our eyes, stitched together by our brain's relentless editing and extrapolation. Consider this for a moment. Your optic nerve, the vital link between your eye and brain, is positioned near the center of your retina, effectively creating a blind spot right in the middle of your visual field. Yet, you never perceive this blind spot. Why? Because your brain, ever the master of illusion, samples the surrounding area and seamlessly fills in the gap with its best guess. Now, it's not entirely accurate to say we fabricate the entire world in our minds, but it's fair to suggest that what we experience at any given moment is only a sliver, perhaps 1%, of the actual information out there. The essence of our reality emerges from this dynamic interplay between what we see, what we remember, and what we expect. It's this continuous dance between perception, memory, and expectation that constructs our sense of the world around us. Remarkably, this edited and highly selective version of reality is more than sufficient for us to navigate our lives. Now, you might wonder, if we're tracking only 1% of the available information, how do we manage something as complex as riding a bicycle? The answer lies in the efficiency of that 1%. It turns out that even this tiny fraction of information is immensely rich. If we had to consciously process every detail on the road, it would take us minutes, if not longer, to decide whether to turn right or left. By delving into how our senses truly function, we catch a glimpse of what our brains are up to, beyond our conscious awareness. From this minuscule amount of data, our brains construct an elaborate simulation of the visual world. It feels authentic because we have nothing to compare it to. And most of the time, our brains' simulations align with those of others around us, reinforcing this shared reality. It's only when discrepancies arise that we begin to question and learn more about how perception truly works. But what does this tell us about something as fundamental as color? Are we simply inventing color in our minds, or does it actually exist out there in the world? The truth is, color, as we perceive it, happens in the brain. The light that enters our eyes, contrary to what we might have been taught, is not inherently colored. Color is an interpretation, a creation of our brains. Light illuminates the world and reflects off objects, each wavelength corresponding to a different color. But the light that reaches our eyes is not just a straightforward signal. It's a complex product of both the light's wavelength and the surface properties of the object it reflects from. This signal is then focused onto the retina, which is equipped with around 130 million light-sensitive cells. Among them are 3 types of cones, each attuned to different wavelengths: long, medium, and short. But even at this stage, what we have is still not color. For color to emerge, the brain must take this 3-part code from the retina and process it through the relative response of these cones. It's only when the signal reaches an area called V4 in the brain that we get a neural representation of color that matches our perceptual experience. If our brains didn't operate this way, the color of objects would constantly shift with changing light, rendering color a confusing and unreliable signal. Without this calibration, a green apple would appear gray in a shadowy cavern, blue at dawn, and orange at dusk. Instead, our brains skillfully adjust our perception to keep color consistent, ensuring that the green apple remains green no matter the lighting conditions. This principle of color constancy extends beyond humans. Different species have evolved distinct types of color vision, each tailored to their survival needs. Birds, for instance, need to discern subtle color differences from afar, so they possess an additional type of cone, allowing them to see a broader spectrum of colors than we can. Bees, driven by the need to locate nectar-rich flowers, perceive ultraviolet light, which is invisible to us. Meanwhile, dogs, who rely more on smell than sight, have fewer types of cones, and their world appears in a more muted palette. Color offers us a wealth of information about the world, but it's crucial to understand that what we perceive isn't color as it exists out there in some objective reality. Instead, we see color in the context of its usefulness to us. Consider the infamous dress, the viral phenomenon of 2015 that had the internet split. Was it blue and black, or white and gold? This simple image sparked a wave of scientific inquiry, highlighting profound differences in human color perception and offering insights into the neuroscience of vision. The dress is perhaps the most striking example of how our brains interpret color based on what's practical for us, rather than some unfiltered truth. The reason people saw the dress differently boils down to how their brains made assumptions about the lighting. If you're someone who spends more time indoors under artificial light, which leans towards yellow, your brain is more likely to interpret the dress as black and blue, compensating for what it assumes is yellowish lighting. On the other hand, if you're used to natural blue or light, you might see it as white and gold. So, what's the real color of the dress? Before this phenomenon, we hadn't fully grasped how differently individuals could perceive something as fundamental as color. We're accustomed to the idea that we all vary physically, different skin tones, heights, and shapes. But just as we differ on the outside, we also differ on the inside. This internal diversity is crucial, reminding us to approach our own perceptions with a certain humility. Illusions like the dress, or even simple auditory tricks, offer us a front row seat to observe how the brain constructs our experience of reality. And it's not just our vision at play. Listen to this. Clear enough, right? Now hear this. Simple, but here's the twist. What if I told you these two audio clips are identical? For most people, what you hear is determined by the label you've been given. Sound unbelievable? Let's try it again. Read one phrase while you listen, then switch to the other. What's happening here is that when your brain encounters uncertainty, it fills in the gaps with its best guess. In this case, you're dealing with a degraded audio clip, and when primed with a specific word, your brain instinctively chooses the best match. Essentially, we often hear what we expect or want to hear, and it can get even more bizarre. Let's mix up the words. Now listen. Sound impossible? Another internet sensation that sparked heated debates across the globe is the infamous Yanny or Laurel audio clip.
Laurel. Laurel. Laurel.
About half of you swear you hear Yanny, while the other half is convinced it's Laurel. Unlike visual illusions, where I might guide you to see things differently, this auditory trick locks most of you into your version of reality. Experts are still puzzled, but it seems some of us tune into the lower frequencies, Laurel, while others catch the higher ones, Yanny. This divide arises from the fact that the audio file is an ambiguous signal composed of both high and low frequencies. This phenomenon is a striking reminder of how actively our brains interpret sensory input. Our perception of the external world is far less objective than we'd like to think. The world around us is undeniably real, but your experience of it is not the world itself. It's a mental construct filtered through a mass of electrochemical signals and protein structures. In other words, you live not in the world, but in your brain's representation of it. Let's test this idea with another experiment. Watch closely when the blue square flashes. Does it line up with the yellow square? If you're like most people, the yellow square always seems to be a fraction ahead, but in reality, they're perfectly aligned. Some neuroscientists argue that your brain isn't designed to perceive the world with perfect accuracy. Instead, its primary function is to predict what happens next. You don't just see, you see what you expect to see, an anticipated path of motion. This predictive power is what allows us to sink a jump shot in basketball, serve in tennis, or simply catch a ball. The brain is a sophisticated predicting machine. Given the context of a moment, it calculates the most likely sequence of events. Sensory information is then used to calibrate, update, and fine-tune these predictions, not to match objective reality, but to ensure that the brain's interpretations are useful for survival. And when it comes to survival, one of the brain's most critical signals is pain. Let's dive into the thermal grill illusion, a curious sensory phenomenon first demonstrated in 1896 by Swedish physician Torsten Thunberg. The illusion is created using an interlaced grill of bars that alternate between warm, around 40 degrees Celsius, and cool, about 20 degrees Celsius. When you press your hand against this grill, your brain perceives a sensation of burning heat. If you touch only a warm bar, you feel warmth, and if you touch only a cool bar, you feel coolness. Researchers have used this illusion to uncover the complex relationship between cold heat and pain sensations. What's likely happening is that your brain, faced with simultaneous signals of cold and warmth, interprets the mix as pain. In your hands, you have separate sensors for detecting heat, cold, and pain. Under normal circumstances, when you touch something slightly cold, both your cold and pain sensors are activated, but the cold sensors usually override the pain signals, telling your brain there's no danger. However, in the unnatural scenario created by the thermal grill, where you're touching something warm and cold simultaneously, the heat signals cancel out the cold ones, leaving only the pain signals active. This fascinating interplay between your senses reveals just how complex and subjective our experience of reality truly is. Our brains are constantly decoding, predicting, and interpreting the world around us, not to deliver a flawless picture, but to craft a perception that serves our survival. So, is pain real, or is it merely a construct, an illusion of the brain? Let's break this down. Noxious stimuli, like plunging your hand into hot water, are undeniably real. They're aversive, tangible, and measurable. The perception of such stimuli, the sensation that we call pain, is also real, but it's more nuanced. Pain is less a direct response and more a complex construct of the brain. It's the brain's interpretation of a signal, a narrative it creates after that signal travels through well-defined neural pathways. You stub your toe, and we can map out the anatomy of what just occurred. The nerves firing, the signals racing to your brain. But until that signal reaches the brain, it's not pain as we know it. Pain, much like the experience of color, is a subjective creation of the mind. Yet, just because pain is a mental construct doesn't diminish its critical role in survival. Pain is an essential teacher, especially in childhood. It teaches us which behaviors are safe and which ones could lead to harm. Pain, then, is not just important, it's indispensable. Illusions, too, are captivating because they act as fractures in our constructed reality. They expose the discrepancies between how we perceive the world and how it actually is. These illusions are like cracks in the matrix, revealing the inner workings of our mind's machinery. While many believe the brain faithfully reconstructs the world, this isn't the case. The brain receives minimal input and uses it to create a grand, elaborate model of reality. We're bombarded with vast amounts of sensory data, far more than we can process. Illusions can be thought of as the brain's shortcuts, ways to make sense of the world faster and more efficiently, using fewer resources. From these tiny snippets of information, the brain builds a rich, complex simulation of reality, a simulation we experience as consciousness. This is the crown jewel of human experience. We often take it for granted, yet every time we wake up, our brain seamlessly stitches together sensory inputs. The sound of distant birdsong, the aroma of fresh bread, the warmth of the morning sun, into a coherent experience of the world. This experience, this awareness, is what we call consciousness. In the realm of neuroscience, consciousness is the holy grail, a mystery that has captivated human thought for millennia. The word consciousness carries different meanings for different people. For some, it signifies being awake rather than asleep, self-awareness, or the contents of our thoughts. But to neuroscientists, consciousness is far more fundamental. It's simply the internal experience, the feeling of something, whether that's the sight of red strawberries, the taste of them, the flash of lightning, or the crack of thunder. Consciousness is the brain's way of making sense of existence, a process both profoundly complex and utterly fascinating. We are intricate biological organisms, yet at the core of our existence lies a profound truth. We are conscious beings. When we open our eyes, it's not merely that our brains are crunching data from the visual world around us. No, we're having an experience, a lived subjective reality. Consider infants. Everything we understand suggests they arrive in this world conscious. From the moment they draw their first breath, they're absorbing information. But they're not just passive recipients. These tiny humans are making rational decisions about what to learn and whom to trust from a remarkably early stage. They're building memories of their environment, their caregivers, and their essential relationships. And all of this cognitive activity is incredibly energy intensive. Brains, after all, are not just sophisticated, they're gluttonous. Even as you sit here now, your brain is burning through about 20% of your total caloric intake. That's a substantial amount, but consider this. A 2-year-old's brain is consuming 60% of their calories. That's right, nearly 2/3 of what a toddler eats is fueling their brain. Why is that? To unravel this, let's examine the neural landscape of a toddler versus an adult. A 2-year-old's brain is buzzing with around 2 quadrillion synaptic connections, an intricate, sprawling network. But by adulthood, that number has been ruthlessly pruned, leaving us with roughly half as many connections. Think of the young brain as a web of backcountry roads, small, winding paths connecting tiny villages. Traffic is light, and progress is slow, but these roads link a vast number of places. Contrast that with the adult brain, which resembles a network of superhighways. These routes are built for speed and efficiency, funneling traffic quickly from one major hub to another, but they don't connect nearly as many destinations. As we age, our brains prioritize efficiency. We strengthen the pathways that matter, those that help us navigate our daily lives with precision, and we prune away the rest. It's a process of neural minimalism. What we end up with is a streamlined, highly effective machine, capable of performing a limited set of tasks with exceptional skill. Early childhood is a period of boundless exploration, where the brain is teeming with potential and possibilities. This is the stage where curiosity reigns supreme, albeit at the cost of being less adept at routine tasks, like getting dressed for preschool. In contrast, the adult brain excels at executing familiar tasks, but struggles with adaptability and innovation. This leads to an intriguing hypothesis. Perhaps consciousness exists to help us focus on what's crucial at any given moment. Imagine it as a spotlight, with adults directing a sharp beam of attention on one specific area, leaving the periphery in darkness. Meanwhile, a child's consciousness is more like a floodlight, casting a broad glow over nearly everything, capturing a wider array of stimuli. Consciousness might function as an amplifier, turning up the volume on significant signals while drowning out the background noise. But is there evidence to support this? fMRI, a tool that allows us to peek inside the brain as it functions, tracking blood flow to create a dynamic map of neural activity. Neuroscientists have devised ingenious experiments to probe where consciousness resides in the brain and to uncover its mechanisms. We understand that our brains craft an internal reality by stitching together fragmented sensory data, essentially filling in the blanks with the most plausible guesses about the world outside. But what drives these guesses? The key is memory. Each of us is equipped with a rich tapestry of experiences, our birthplace, educational journey, romantic entanglements, all of which shape our identity. Yet intriguingly, this foundation isn't as unshakable as it seems. The narratives we construct, our so-called memories, are not static truths but fluid reconstructions. We're engaged in an ongoing revision of our personal stories. Each recollection, whether of childhood games, first loves, profound losses, or skydiving thrills, alters the memory itself. We once believed that each time we accessed a memory, we were revisiting the original event. However, recent insights reveal that recalling a memory doesn't retrieve it intact, but rather destabilizes it. Here's the crux. When we bring a memory to mind, we move it into our working memory, where it's reevaluated. This act disrupts the original long-term memory, which must then be painstakingly reconstructed before being stored again. Each iteration introduces potential distortions, adding layers of noise that further modify the memory. This phenomenon, known as reconsolidation, was first uncovered in rodent studies, where researchers observed the neural pathways involved in memory reformation. Emerging evidence suggests that human memories undergo a similar process. Indeed, certain drugs that interfere with reconsolidation have been shown to alter human recollections. This brings us to a profound question. How can we discern what is true? How do we differentiate reality from our subjective interpretations? Perhaps part of the answer lies in acknowledging that some aspects of this fluidity are less significant than we might assume. While it's disconcerting to think that our memories might not reflect past events perfectly, there's a liberating aspect to this realization. If we were anchored to our original, unalterable memories, we'd be trapped in the past. Instead, the malleability of memory empowers us to evolve, adapt, and continuously redefine the narrative of our lives. Our sense of self, much like our perceptions, is an ever-evolving construct, meticulously designed to serve us in the present moment. Think of the brain as a master storyteller, weaving a narrative that guides our interaction with the world. It's not just a machine, it's a prediction engine, spinning tales that help us make sense of our existence. The narratives we craft about ourselves might just be the grandest illusions we engage in. So, what does it mean if our sense of self is an illusion? Embrace it. It's the most reliable framework we have. What we experience isn't the world as it objectively exists, but as our brains interpret and construct it. Our brains are extraordinary devices, not tuned for precision but for survival. They build our internal reality from disparate sensory inputs and memories, creating a rich tapestry of conscious experience. The simple act of seeing, of opening our eyes, should be celebrated. The neural computations that allow us to perceive even the most mundane aspects of life are nothing short of miraculous, imbuing our everyday experiences with meaning and depth. Thank you for joining me on this intellectual adventure. If you found this exploration thought-provoking, please like, subscribe, and share your insights in the comments below. Together, let's keep delving into the enigmas of our existence, one revelation at a time. Stay inquisitive, stay compassionate, and always remember, we are all part of this intricate web of connection.